going on, guys? I'm Tim Kelly. This is Phillies Stoplight, a special reaction edition here as the Phillies released Nick Castellanos today. And honestly, it was a quiet day. No Phillies pitchers through bullpen, so there really wasn't a ton going on. I had a big story with an interview with Johan Rojas that I was about to publish. Then I went on the On Patterson podcast, and of course, the second I went on with Mike and Anthony, the Phillies decided that they were or announced that they were releasing Nick Castellanos. Obviously, it had been pretty apparent that a resolution was coming in the near future. And throughout this podcast, I'm going to be looking down and reading off of some of this stuff because I want to make sure I get all the information correct and accurate, because obviously a lot has been said here. There's very clearly a PR battle here between Nick Castellanos and the Phillies to kind of get different sides and different aspects out. And I understand that, and I want to make sure everyone's side is heard on this, and you can make your own determinations, and I'll give you some of my thoughts as well. The first thing I would say is that I think the Phillies should have done this last week, because had you done this last week, you could have had Dave Dombrowski and Rob Thompson and whoever on a Zoom. You could have gotten it over with at that point and moved on, turned the page. And that doesn't mean Kyle Schwarber and Bryce Harper and some key Phillies wouldn't have been asked questions by Dave or by media about the decision to release Nick Castellanos, but it wouldn't have been a story. Now it's kind of become the story of the beginning of spring training, and I imagine it'll go for a few more days because you're going to have key Phillies being asked about it as they arrive the next few days. So I would say the Phillies should have handled this differently, in the sense that they should have probably taken care of it sooner. Dave Dombrowski did say the Phillies were holding out hope that they could make a trade throughout the offseason. They did draw some interest in him. Ultimately, nothing came to fruition that would have allowed them to save even a little bit of the money. And in the end, they're going to eat $20 million. And I know there's a lot of really big Nick Castellanos fans that are very upset with how this whole situation played out. But the one thing I think it's important to remember is the Phillies are setting $20 million on fire. If they thought that there would have been a way to salvage this relationship, and that this was something that they could put the pieces back together for another season and move forward, I think they would have done it. The fact that they didn't shows you how bad the blood got here near the end, it's crazy. Dave Dombrowski drafted Nick Castellanos in Detroit. He gave him $100 million deal as a free agent, and maybe that's where some of the fault lies. Like you knew what type of personality he was, and you invested a major deal in him. You knew that there were some flaws in him as a player, and you made a major investment in him. And we'll get more into kind of the overall legacy, but I do want to go into the he said, she said, some of that back and forth. Matt Gelb of The Athletic wrote a tremendous story kind of breaking down the last year and how this relationship fell apart between the two sides. And he said, the beginning of the end for Nick Castellanos' time in Philadelphia came on the night when he cracked open a Presidente beer and carried the green bottle into the Phillies dugout in the middle of a game. It was Monday in June in the 8th inning, and Castellanos felt he had been disrespected at the highest level. Removed for defensive purposes in a game against the Miami Marlins, played in his hometown with friends and family in the seats, Castellanos directed his ire at Phillies coaches. The beer served as a prop. If not in the game, Castellanos was on vacation. He yelled at coaches and manager Rob Thompson while teammates watched. So we don't know to this point what the quote-unquote inappropriate comment he made, and maybe it wasn't one. Maybe there wasn't like a specific comment he made. It was kind of the entire situation that he got benched for, and maybe we've spent the last 6 months wondering what's the exact words he said, and it's really more about how he acted overall. And maybe there isn't this one juicy thing that he said, but the situation as a whole. With that said, Nick Castellanos put out a letter. He put out a letter talking about this and giving his side, because he, I guess, got tipped off that this story was going to come out. Matt Gelb did say in his story that through his agent, Castellanos hired an agent this offseason after previously representing himself. He was given a chance to comment for the story and did not do it, or didn't return the request. Whatever the case was, Castellanos was not quoted in the Gelb story. But he said in an Instagram post, and I don't want to misrepresent this, he did write a long part about that, thanking Phillies fans. And you should go read it, because it was a nice letter in that portion. And if you're a fan of Nick Castellanos, you'll probably enjoy that portion of the letter. But what he said here, and let me just pull this part up. he said, okay, apparently I need to address what he dubbed the Miami incident. As one of my friends on the team has informed me, there's an article waiting to come out without my consent or comments about the situation. Now, you don't need anyone's consent to put an article out, but you do normally reach out for comment. And as I said, Matt Gelb did that. So I'm just going to share myself. As a veteran of the game of baseball, there are rules, and I broke one in Miami. After being taken out of a close ball game in front of my friends and family, I brought Presidente into the dugout. I then sat next to Rob and let him know that too much slack in some areas and too tight of restrictions in others are not conducive to us winning. Shout out to my teammates and Howie Kendrick for taking the beer out of my hands before I could take a sip. I appreciate you guys. After the game, I went into the office with Dave and Rob. We aired out our differences, and the conversation ended with me apologizing for letting my emotions get the best of me. I would like to note that I was ready to share the incidents of this detail to the media the next day, but was instructed not to by management. The punishment I received for my actions was the benching the following game. I love this game. I love being a teammate, and I am addicted to winning. I will learn from this. Now, there's a few things. I don't doubt for a second that he was advised not to say whatever he wanted to say by PR or whoever, but Nick Castellanos is not someone that I think almost ever takes the advice of what anyone else tells him to say. Nick Castellanos, for better or for worse, is going to say exactly what it is that he wants to say. So he could have come out that next day in Miami and explained the whole incident. He decided not to. And I don't doubt that he had some urging not to, but if he wanted to do it, he could have done that, and he chose not to. I want to go part by part here. Obviously, inappropriate in the dugout. You can't bring a beer into the dugout. That goes without saying. And I understand the frustration with being pulled in Miami, but one of the realities is the Phillies gave him more leash than I think a lot of people probably thought he should have gotten defensively. He never graded out well defensively. It was much worse last year, but it was always among the worst in the league outfielders. And I get that he worked hard, and he did work hard to improve as an outfielder, and he deserves credit for that. At the same time, this is the major leagues, and the results are ultimately the results. And I know a lot of people point to, well, he didn't make any errors. I don't remember in any other instance ever an outfielder being judged by their errors. And I mean, if you make a lot of errors and you're bad, then you're not going to be an outfielder very long. But like when you talk about Andrew Jones or Willie Mays or any outfielders, we don't say, oh, they made so few errors. And now with modern players, we talk about like Pete Crow Armstrong and some of the really Stephen Kwan, some of the really good fielding outfielders in baseball. We point to metrics like defensive runs saved and outs above average. And Nick Castellanos, at no point in his career at the multiple positions he's played at, has he graded out well. And when it's a close game late, yeah, it sucks that it happened in Miami, and maybe it should have been handled differently in the sense that they should have started it somewhere else. But you're trying to win a game in the major leagues, and if you can put Johan Rojas in the outfield as opposed to Nick Castellanos, it's a pretty close. It's the same as if Johan Rojas was batting and you pinch hit Nick Castellanos. Maybe there's some hurt feelings, but this is the major leagues, and they're going to do what is best for the team to win the game. You can't bring beer into the dugout. That's kind of what I come back to here. And I get that after the game, he says he went into the office with Dave and Rob. They aired out their differences. So be it. I mean, just because even if he had done all this behind the scenes, there's still lines that you can't cross with your bosses, your employers, whoever, as much as we all may want to do it at times. So, but he didn't do that initially. This was after he had already made a scene in the dugout, according to everyone involved at this point. And the one line that really stuck out to me in this, the Matt Gelb story, was him saying the beer served as a prop. If not in the game, Castellanos was on vacation. And no one needs me to confirm Matt Gelb. I'm not in any way suggesting that. But what I would say, from having been there, covered the team, I've been there, I've covered the entire Castellanos tenure. What I would say is he became a bad citizen in some senses last season, especially on days where he wasn't playing. On days where he was playing, he was the first person out there. But on days where he wasn't playing, his feet were up. He was laying on the couch one time, I remember, in the middle of the dugout, kind of sleeping, which isn't normally something you see in the middle of the dugout. It seemed like he didn't enjoy it when the Phillies won games where he didn't play in. And I get it. I would have the same emotions if I was him. But I do think there is part of being a teammate and being somebody that's a veteran where sometimes you got to kind of, there's situations that suck that you got to kind of uh, put on a happy face, even if you don't want to. There was a point in the Matt Gelb story where he says that Castellanos would play music on his speaker when the Phillies lost, but he didn't play well. And one other thing I would say is, and Nick Castellanos talked about how much he appreciated Phillies fans' embrace of his son Liam, and I do think that was a really cool thing that happened. And if Liam ever ends up being a major league player or anything, like the stories he'll be able to tell of having been around the team and in clubhouses will be amazing. I Without getting myself in trouble here, I think there is a difference though on June 1st with having your son take grounders or BP before a game, fly balls, and doing it on October 1st. And I do think prior to some of these postseason games, when you have your son taking fly balls, when you have other major leaguers, particularly guys that maybe aren't natural outfielders or aren't great defenders, trying to get in extra work, I think it does cross the point where it's inappropriate. And I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I think that's something I noticed and many people noticed down the stretch of last season, that plenty of people have kids, and it's cool as a major league player to be able to have your kids around. But there's maybe some times where your kid shouldn't be taking fly balls or batting practice before games, in my opinion. What else? So, and Dave Dombrowski was clear to say it was not just this one incident. There was also the moment in Arizona where he spoke after it was after a win against the Diamondbacks. He had his 250th home run. I was not there to put that out, but I've reviewed the full video multiple times at this point. Grace Del Pizzo from Mont Patterson was there. I spoke with her as well at that time, and he talked multiple times about Rob not having communicated the best over the years. And we can debate whether certain questions were appropriate at given times or whatever. I'm sure I've asked bad questions. It's one of those things when you're in media and you cover a baseball team, you kind of have to have like a short memory, like a closer. There's going to be days where you think something in your head sounds like a good question and then you ask it and it comes out wrong, or it's not a bad question, but you don't get a good response because the player's in a bad mood or whatever. Regardless, I think Nick could have diffused the situation by just saying, I'm doing whatever to help this team win, which he did. To his credit, he did say something to that effect, but not going into the Rob stuff. And he brought that up a few weeks before the playoffs, and I just don't think that was a good look at that time. To tell you the truth, though, going through all this, the takeaway I have is that there isn't one moment, and any one off of these incidents, maybe not the Miami one, because bringing the beer into the dugout, yelling at the coaches, that's a pretty bad look. I do think maybe it's hard to come back from that one. And Matt Gelb, again, in his great story, he spoke with players off the record, and I'm sure there will be people that say, well, I don't believe it because they didn't put their names behind it. They're not going to put their names behind it. So believe what you're going to believe, but I feel 100% certain that those quotes in there are accurate because he's a tremendous reporter, and I see how he works and whatnot. So believe what you're going to believe, but the reason people use anonymous quotes is because that's the only way in some cases that you're going to get that information. And I do think it sheds a light on the fact that there was this perception that it was only just Rob and Nick and everything else was good. And I don't think by the end of last season that was the case. I think the one thing I would point to that I don't know that anybody's brought up today that I've seen is Nick spoke on the record about the disagreement or the discussion, whatever, that Bryce Harper had with Rob Manfred last summer when the report came out that Harper eventually told Manfred to get the F out of the clubhouse. I'm happy Nick spoke about it because it was good for our purposes, but I can imagine, and nobody's told me this, but I can imagine it was not well received by teammates that he spoke on the record about that and kind of aired out something that seemingly should have been private. And if Bryce Harper wanted it out there, he trust me, Bryce Harper's very media savvy. He or Scott Boras or whoever could have gotten that out there. So I think that's another thing. And you just add all these things up, and it just became a situation where he could not return. And I think that happens from time to time in sports, but when you have a $20 million salary, it's a lot more difficult to swallow, and that's maybe why the Phillies held on to him as long as they probably possibly could before he was going to be due to report and then ultimately release him. As far as how he's going to be viewed long term, how his legacy is going to be viewed with the Phillies, I think there's some incredible moments, and I don't want to gloss over that, and I don't want to see him anti-Castellanos or anything. He had some excellent moments. Those back-to-back 2-homer games against the Braves, the teeing off against Spencer Strider in the playoffs, those are legendary moments for the Phillies in the postseason, and even baseball. I mean, there's that great meme of Nick Castellanos, and on the TBS thing, they just put first MLB player ever, and it meant to say to ever hit 2 home runs in back-to-back playoff games. But he was a guy, when he got hot, he could carry you and hit as well as anybody. The flip side was when he was cold, it was ugly. And the numbers before the Phillies signed him with the Reds, he had a 309 batting average and a 939 OPS. Now, you can certainly attribute some of that to playing at Great American Ballpark, which is arguably the most hitter-friendly park in baseball outside of Coors Field, which is at Mile High. But you wouldn't have expected the drop-off to a 260 batting average and a 732 OPS that you ultimately got from him over his 4 seasons with the Phillies. And I think looking at that, it's hard to not feel, just from a performance standpoint, that this was a very underwhelming tenure. And again, it's not that there weren't great moments. He was excellent in the second half of the 2024 season, but his first and his last season, he was just bad. He didn't field well and he didn't hit well. And those 2 seasons in between, he had some really good stretches and some really not good stretches. And he could go from being the hottest hitter in baseball, as he was in the NLDS against the Braves, to the coldest hitter you've ever seen, which he was in the NLCS against the Diamondbacks. And there's a lot of guys to share blame for the Diamondbacks. Bryce Harper, Trey Turner, Kyle Schwarber, none of them in game 6 or 7 came through either. So Nick Castellanos in the NLDS round is one of the greatest performers there's ever been. The other rounds of the postseason, it's much more of a mixed bag. But we talk about the Phillies don't have a cleanup hitter. Part of the reason they don't have a cleanup hitter is because they're paying Nick Castellanos $20 million now not to play for them. When they signed him to be that guy. And if not that guy, to be the 2 or 3 hitter or the 5 hitter, and you rearrange the order accordingly. For him to have really been more like a number 7 hitter, maybe a number 6 hitter in terms of production, a 260 batting average with a 732 OPS, it's extremely disappointing, especially because he doesn't add value elsewhere. He's not a base stealer. He's not a strong defender, to say the least. So in many senses, I think it boils down to there's the personal aspect of how this all got ugly at the end. And I'm sure we'll continue to learn more about that. Nick will, at some point, I think, play against the Phillies, whether it's in spring training or the regular season. And I'm sure he'll talk before then, and we'll see. I was talking with somebody today. The one thing about Nick, you didn't always know what you're going to get from him, but I don't think I ever asked to talk to him, and he said no to me. And I respect that. And he was honest. Sometimes, though, you maybe shouldn't be as honest as you want to be, and that's part of being an adult, is being able to filter yourself. And I think it just ran its course. I think he maybe became a tired act by the end of last season after 4 years here. And again, these are things that should have been considered before you gave someone an $100 million contract. It's part of the equation going into this, and it obviously got ugly at the end. So there will be plenty more to say about this and more conversation on Pattison.com. But I wanted to get that out there because I felt like it was easier to do it talking and in video form than it is in audio. And I know people have a lot of thoughts, and I'm sure probably no one will agree with 100% of what I said. But one thing that is for sure, he's definitely one of the most interesting players I covered. And I talked to guys that have written about the Phillies for years, and I said, what was it like covering? I mean, Ryan Howard and Jimmy Rollins and those guys, they're around. So I can kind of get an idea of what it was like covering them on a day to day basis. But I go back and I say, what was it like covering Cliff Lee, who no one's heard from in a decade? What was it like covering Roy Halladay, who obviously passed away? Guys like that I don't have access to. I obviously was way younger than being working age at that time. And I think someday there'll be someone covering the Phillies, and hopefully in this awful industry, I'm lucky enough to still be one of them at that time. And they'll ask me about that, and I'll have a lot of stories to tell because there were highs and there were lows. And I think there's a disagreement between many people of whether there were more highs than lows, but it was definitely interesting. You can't say it wasn't interesting. So hopefully you think our content at onpattison.com, which is part of the Fideri News Network, is interesting. If you need a personal injury lawyer, Wapner Newman, who sponsored this video, they are interesting. And so check out all our content, and I will talk to you guys next time.